Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Soul Shift. I'm your host, Dani, and I broke up with my therapist. Yes, I had to let my previous therapist go, and we'll talk all about that. Today, we are talking about changes in our mental health and sometimes the need of breaking up or changing your therapist. I have some personal stories to share, a few tips that I've learned over these last 3 years. So keep on listening. All right. Changing therapist is a topic that most people don't really talk about. Most people talk about joining therapy, finding a therapist, loving your therapist, how important it is to your journey, but no one really talks about when you have a therapist and your lives change. When you have a life change, the therapist that you have had for however much time may not be the right fit for your current phase of life. When I first started therapy, it was more about managing everyday stress and just figuring out, how to manage work expectations, work life balance, very much just maintenance level. No real crisis, nothing really, serious going on, just an outlet to manage my thoughts. But then as I went through some significant life changes, like dealing with trauma, death, grief, I realized I needed a therapist who could support me through deeper emotional layers. Therapy is a relationship. It truly is a relationship, and it is a serious relationship, and it has to be the right match. Therapy should feel like a safe space where you could be your authentic self and explore your emotions and not feel judged. You should be able to say whatever you need to say and know that it's a safe space to do so. Because I had spent so much time with my first therapist on so many surface level things, it was almost impossible for me to feel comfortable discussing these really real and intense things that were now happening in my life and the thoughts and everything that I was going through. I couldn't take my sessions seriously because I wasn't being fully honest. I would come into my session, and because it had been so long of just very surface level conversation, my therapist almost started the session the same way, just thinking, okay, let's just go in here and just push through with our maintenance like normal, kind of check the box and keep it pushing. But um, I mentioned how my life had changed, and my therapist, I could tell that they were very taken aback by it. They were not sure how to respond at first, but very quickly try to get out of that and kind of dip into a more serious, mood, if you will. But it just wasn't working for me. I just didn't feel like this was a space for me to do that in. And I don't know how to explain that, but if you're in that situation or you've been in that situation, you know what that feels like. So I had to figure out how to navigate that process of changing your therapist. To me, it started with, just like I said, recognizing that that current relationship was not meeting my needs anymore. It's okay to outgrow your therapist or feel like you need someone with a different approach. My therapist was not a bad person. I loved being there. It just wasn't the right fit for who I had become throughout my newest life experience. It's all about what's best for your mental health journey, and it can feel daunting, but trust me, it is so worth it when you find that right fit. And we'll get into that a little bit here. I am someone who had experienced very minimal tragedy in life. I had some sudden losses in my life that were, I lost people that were close to me, and it was sad, and I struggled for a bit to cope. But in 2021, I lost the person who helped me through all of those previous struggles. My uncle that I mentioned, I think on like the first or second podcast, he checked in with me all the time. So if something didn't feel right or didn't sound right, he would show up. I remember in college, I was in it was like finals week or something. I don't remember exactly what's going on, but I posted a Facebook status about just being so over it and being so tired. And he sent me a text message and he said, it was something like, "Are you good? Like, are you fine?" And I think I just responded and said, "No." And that was it. And probably like 45 minutes to an hour later, he showed up. He showed up because that wasn't the answer he wanted. He needed to put eyes on me and make sure things were good, see how things were going. And he was a person who didn't have a ton of money. He didn't really have money to be spending gas to drive to my college to come and check in on me, but he valued people. He didn't have a lot of money to give to me or to anyone, but he gave his time. And he had two children. He had two daughters. He had a job. He had friends. He was a DJ. He played baseball. I don't know if he still played basketball, but he was becoming a ref. He was very busy, but he was so present. And I never felt like a bother. I never felt like he had somewhere else to be when he was with me. And I certainly never, ever in my entire life pictured that there would be a point that I would have to watch him fight for his life and then live through losing him. Now, typically, if something like this would happen, like I said, I've had other losses in my life, I would call or text him. Usually text. We didn't do a lot of phone calls, but I would text him. He was the perfect, just right amount of funny and serious and empathetic in those situations. And right now, I needed him, but he was the one that I had lost. So I felt lost, like more than I ever have in my entire life. I was so lost. It felt like I was watching my life from behind like a glass. I don't know how else to explain it other than it felt like when I left the hospital that night of his accident, it just felt like when I walked outside and on my way to the parking garage to my car, it just felt like I was behind a glass just watching everything happening and I couldn't wake up. And I had never felt like that before. And that's exactly how I felt. And I felt like that for a very long time. Grief is an insanely heavy burden to carry. And sometimes it just feels like no one quite understands the depth of your pain. Like, I cannot put into words how I felt in those moments and the moments after. So that's where therapy became a lifeline for me. Having a therapist and partner with my family, my husband, having that therapist who did not know my uncle, who was totally out of the situation, couldn't, give me any advice that the family would say or things that would just annoy me that my family could say or other people outside of my family would say. My therapist could hold space for my grief, could validate my emotions, and kind of guide me through the healing process, which I had never done before. And that was invaluable for me. Having a therapist who could relate was also important to me. I wanted someone that could show me there was a way to function in grief. I wanted to see that it was possible because it truly felt like I would just never be normal ever again. Like, this is just how I am. I swear I cried every day what felt like for a year. I just felt like I cried for a year. I just felt like I could not function. And having someone who could tell me that they had been through something similar and see them function and hear their process was very useful for me. Therapy provided me with tools to cope with the waves of grief. And I had always heard that, but it is a roller coaster. It is moments of intense sadness, and then there's a little bit of joy, and then you're confused, then you're just numb. There were just so many challenges to move forward. And I was actually terrified to stop crying. I felt better when I cried because I felt guilty when I wasn't. If I had a moment where maybe my daughter did something funny or my husband and I watched a show and I would start laughing, I would feel bad because I didn't think I should be able to be joyful when my cousins had lost their dad. My grandma just buried her son. My mom had was holding so much responsibility, and she still is, caring for the business side of things, because if you didn't know, when someone close to you dies, there's so much to do, and there's so much pain that goes along with just that. So she was dealing with that all while still losing her little brother. And I had to realize that me having these moments of joy or days of joy or weeks or months of joy and happiness, going on a vacation, none of that meant that I was erasing the pain of losing my uncle, but I was learning to live with it in a healthier way. And that's something that therapy helped me do. And I would not have been able to do any of that if I wouldn't have made that switch to a new therapist. We do need to address the unspoken aspect of changing the therapist, because it kind of sounds like a simple thing to do. Like, this isn't right for me, just go ahead and switch. But I felt guilt. And I can imagine that if you're someone who has had a therapist for a long time, you would probably feel guilt too. And I think that's normal to feel a sense of guilt when ending that relationship. Your therapist has been a part of your journey, and there's a bond that's been established. You could fear that you're going to hurt their feelings, or like you're abandoning them when they have been so supportive during your challenging times. In my situation, like I said, there weren't so many terribly dark conversations I had to have with my therapist, but I do know that's not everyone's situation, so I can imagine that that'd be really hard to move on from. Then there's also that fear of finding the new therapist. And you know that the current therapist isn't right for you, but what if this next one is worse or doesn't understand you as well as the other one did before? What if you can't build that relationship? Am I going to have to start all over again and rehash this whole story all over again? Those are all valid concerns. And they can, and they did create hesitancy for me making a change. But I had to be reminded of this. And I want to remind you that it is all about your well-being, and it is okay to prioritize your needs, especially when it comes to mental health. Just like in any relationship, that therapeutic relationship should be based on trust, understanding, and mutual growth. Your therapist should want you to find the best fit for you if they genuinely care about you in the way that they have shown. If you feel like it's time for a change, you need to honor that feeling and just trust that it's part of the journey, and keep it pushing. Go and find who's best for you. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this, and a reminder, if you will, that prioritizing your mental health is all about being proactive, about finding the right support. Don't be afraid to break up with your therapist. If it's not the right fit, it's all a part of your self-care journey. And if you are facing crippling grief like I was, and crippling is an understatement, if you are facing grief or depression, overwhelming emotions, I truly urge you to consider therapy. It's not a sign of weakness. It is very courageous, and it's a step towards finding inner peace. And your mental well-being matters a lot. It's not a bad thing to care about your mental health. You're not weak. You're not sick for caring about your mental health. I urge you to be the change for that in your family and your communities, because it's so important, and we're losing very special people to their own minds because they don't have help. You need to be the example that you can find support and you can make a difference in your life and someone else's. So until next time, Stay strong, stay resilient, and keep embracing the shifts. Bye.